Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of Battlefield Earth, the war that's ongoing between Russia and Ukraine, and obviously the prospects for what could happen here in the United States in just a matter of a couple of months. So, I want to start off the program today and have a quick discussion about the presidential debate last night. Did anybody watch it? Did you sit down? Did you watch the debate? Now, I got to tell you, I walked away from the debate with mixed feelings, quite honestly. I have to ask myself, is this the best at this point, the disunited states, the ununited states of America can do? Is this the best we have? You have two very old men on stage. Now, look, Biden was horrendous. Horrendous. And what's even more concerning about Biden is the fact that that was the very, very best that you are going to get from the information that I have received, that we have received, is that what you saw in terms of the debate last night was a very, very, very heavily medicated and very sharp Joseph Biden. The reality in the White House is much different. Much different. And he would not be president of the United States, of the disunited states, if that reality was made aware to the public. Now, I have talked about this before. The current rulers of the United States, it is not Joseph Biden. We do not have a president right now calling the shots. It is a group or a committee of individuals. You want to call it the deep state, call it what you will, that right now is running the country. Donald Trump. He has been sharper in the past. He's getting old himself. During the debate, I wish there were times where I could have intervened, especially when they were talking about the relationship between Russia and NATO, and the fact that Joseph Biden would always declare Article 5. That through disengagement, through not having war, that somehow that is going to create a Article 5 declaration, which would then create the grounds for World War III. Look, what's happening right now, the current status quo, is progressively pushing us towards global war. And part of me believes that those powers that be in the background running the country right now, that is ultimately the goal. That is ultimately the goal for a number of different reasons. Look, if you have a currency that is on the verge of collapse, nothing fixes the economic situation than global war. Global war. It fixes it all. Now, unfortunately, there is an additional cost with global war as well. But the key points that Trump could have responded back to Joseph Biden in terms of, for instance, the Article 5 declaration. He could have just said immediately, Biden, if you get to that point, if there is a Article 5 response, an attack on one is attack on all, no matter really what that looks like, and you are shaping that towards the Russian Federation, then that is World War III. That's what's going to happen, rather than disengagement. Look, the Russians are not going to attack Western Europe. They're not going to do it. And you heard Joseph Biden make these false claims that when the Russians seize Kiev, that Poland and Hungary would be next. That's what he said. He said Poland and Hungary, and he also mentioned Belarus as well. And that just shows you how incompetent and just lack of a situational awareness and understanding that even Joseph Biden has, which is very, very limited. I mean, look, Belarus is essentially part of the Russian Federation. It is a proxy state. Now, to think that after the Ukraine, that the Russians would invade Poland, that's a completely different animal, and at this point, the Russians have no strategic interest after taking control of whatever part of Ukraine they desire to then engage in fighting in Western Europe. It's a whole other ballgame. And it's just something that's not going to happen. And you have to understand that the conflict that we're seeing right now between Russia, Ukraine, and the West was brought on by Western encroachment. NATO had no business, none, zero. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization had no business moving into the former Soviet Union. That's not what NATO was designed for. Yes, back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, when there were hundreds of thousands of Soviet and Warsaw Pact troops massed in the areas of what is now Germany, Czechoslovakia, yes, there was a need for such an alliance. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, that ended. And that should have ended NATO expansion. So instead of doing the smart thing, and I think that Donald Trump did a very poor job of articulating that position, which could have been articulated. Unfortunately, I don't know if the uninformed urbanites here in the United States would even understand what he was trying to say. Very few would even tune into this channel and try to get an understanding on what I'm trying to say, which is the truth. But a forward expansion towards what was the Soviet Union has caused the situation that we are currently in now. Look, most of you understand the concept of picking and choosing a battle. No matter what it is, if it's a life choice, there are certain things that happen in which you, as a person, or even countries as nation states, can decide to pick and choose battles. Look, hey, is this battle worth the fight? Is this battle going to lead to something greater in terms of cost versus benefit that I'm prepared to deal with? And if that answer is no, then you have to evaluate, you have to use reason, and decide whether to pursue that choice. In the case of NATO expansion into the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and then finally causing this upheaval in the Ukraine, and trying to install this neoliberal Western, pro-Western government was a bad decision. That's what has led to where we're at now. So the West has decided that this is a battle it's worth pursuing. And the Russians have drawn a line, and anyway, here we are. But the ability for both parties in that debate to try and explain what they're doing and why what they're doing was really nuanced, or not really nuanced, abbreviated, and there's just a lot of very, very, very little understanding in terms of the history and why things were done the way they were done. And mistakes were made. Mistakes by the West has put us in this position that we're in right now. And on stage, as they were debating, Joseph Biden, Donald Trump, the fact remains the Russians have thousands of nuclear weapons. So again, picking and choosing your battles and compromising is something that you have to do when you're dealing with a very heavily armed nuclear state that has drawn a red line in the sand and saying, Ukraine is the limit. You cannot proceed here. We are willing to fight for all if you move into the Ukraine. And the West said, well, we're going to move into the Ukraine. We're going to do it. We don't care. Well, they're caring now. And they'll probably care even more in the direction that we are currently heading. But again, I think just in terms of having Joseph Biden at the podium, people can see the condition that he's in. And as I've talked about in the last video and the video before that, the actual people, the committee, the cabal that is running the United States right now doesn't care. They don't care because I believe at this point they have a way of controlling the voting process. Meaning they have a way of, even if the majority of the people in the United States can clearly see that Joseph Biden is unfit to be president, and even if the majority of the people in the United States, through our constitutional republic process, deems that Donald Trump is the right fit, is the lesser of two evils, the powers that be right now will not allow Donald Trump to become president. Because the powers that be want to remain in power. And they have that ability to control the vote. And again, as I said before, the reason I believe that is because the optics of Biden are so bad that a rational person would believe that there is no possible way he could be president. But it doesn't matter because they control that process. So will your vote count? I don't know. I really don't at this point. Am I going to vote against the cabal that is running the country right now? Am I going to vote against the unitary one-party state? The Democrat Party? Yeah, I am. Will it matter? I believe it won't. I believe it won't. I believe that there are mechanisms in place right now, no matter how many votes Donald Trump gets, at the end of the day, they're going to infuse more digital votes into the digital currency system of voting, which will hand them victory. And that's when you hear the question asked Donald Trump, and he responds to, yes, I will accept the outcome of the election if it's a free and fair election. That's exactly what he's trying to say. He's saying, yes, I will absolutely accept a free and fair election. But the problem is, a lot of folks don't believe the upcoming election is going to be neither free nor fair. And again, the optics of Biden lead one to believe that the decision has already been made. The decision has already been made. Now, it'll be interesting to see if they remove Biden. Now, if they remove Biden, I will have to reassess. I will have to reassess in terms of just how controlled the election is, in terms of the voting process, in terms of the amount of fraudulent digital votes that could be injected into the voting process. We'll see. At this point, a lot of people in the Democrat Party, those who are against the unitary one-party state, obviously those persons can see what's happening, and they don't really believe that this unitary one-party state is controlling the vote, and that's why they're keeping Biden in there. And they're probably wanting to have Biden replaced with another candidate, which may or may not happen. We'll have to see. I think there is a battle going on right now between the unitary one-party deep state and more moderate, reasonable Democrats who want to maintain a constitutional republic. Now, we'll see what the outcome of that is. It's hard to say at this point. Hard to say. But in terms of the war, the battles continue. Very, very heavy fighting is taking place along the entire front lines. The Russians continue to launch massive airstrikes, upwards to more than 100 glide bombs per day are being used against Ukrainian forces. In the last 24 hours, I think they dropped about 100 long-range guided glide bombs against Ukrainian forces. The Russians have upped their drone production. Drone production right now for the Russians is just off the charts. And I've talked about just the fact that the Russians were striking 300 to 400 targets a month with the Lancet and Lancet 3 variants of those kamikaze drones. But there are thousands of drones being used in the conflict. And the Lancet is just one of those varying types of drones that are being used. But the Russians have fully upped production, and hundreds of drones are being used per week. And the drone use by the Russians has now vastly outpaced drone use by the Ukrainians. Early on in the war, the Ukrainians were using the first-person drones, and the Russians have adapted, have modified, and have adopted many of the same tactics that the Ukrainians started using in terms of some of these drone systems. And obviously the Russians had on the drawing board and were actively using some drone systems, but just not on the scale and scope that we've seen being used by Western nation states. But with this war footing now that the Russians are on, with this production capacity that we're seeing right now, and the research and development that is going on, we're going to start to see a lot of new systems being put into place by the Russians that are probably going to really tip the scales on the battlefield. But the Russians right now are perfectly content to continue this slow-moving war of attrition against Ukrainian forces, and it's again designed to literally break the existing Ukrainian state and destroy its military ultimately. And that is the goal right now. and
Sorry,
that will continue. Good old Siri, right? Let's mute that. But that's where we stand for today. Tell me what you thought of the debate. Where are we heading? Where do you think we are heading? I couldn't imagine going back into the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, and seeing what I saw on that stage, and especially in terms of Joseph Biden, and just how bad that is, and what that looks like, and it's insane. It's craziness, and we are not, meaning we, the ununited states of America, we are in a bad place right now, and I don't think people really understand just how bad it is right now, and where this could ultimately take us as a society, both internationally and domestically as well. I think this election could be an election like we've never seen before in the United States. And what I mean by that, I think it's going to get kinetic. It's going to get violent. It's going to get messy. It's going to get nasty. It's going to start to look, I think, a lot like what happened. Now, obviously, the dynamics are a little different than what was observed during the Spanish Civil War. It'll look a little different, but that is the trajectory that we are currently in here in the disunited states, the ununited states. So thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have yourself a good day.